We're going to talk about backgrounds today and what you can do with your backgrounds. Most of you don't have your backgrounds put in your slices yet, as far as like the full background for the page. You've been putting in backgrounds for the slices so that you can type over top of them, but you need that background for the page. You don't want it to stay pure white, at least probably not. In fact, it used to be, well, let's put it this way, you have to designate some kind of background, because it used to be that some browsers made it gray, and another, now it seems like, I think actually if you don't specify a background, I think it still is gray. I forget. But yeah, it used to be like this kind of weird dark gray, which stinks. So you kind of need to think about what you're going to set up for your background. And there's several ways that you can do this, which makes this one of the hardest parts of the whole thing for me to teach, because everybody's design may ask for a different thing. So I'm going to go over a couple of the ways you can do it, and then I may actually do another demo at home or during a free period sometime early next week and just post it without actually taking up class time, so that if your page is a certain type of design, you can go and watch it and learn how to do a different method than what I'm going to teach today. Okay, but we'll get there. So anyway, the first thing that you can do with your website is just a simple solid color. Now the way you do this is just when you want to start setting up a background image, just make sure you click kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and then down here at the bottom you'll see a button called Page Properties. And once you click on that, it's going to bring up this window, and you'll see a whole bunch of options here, appearance, and then you'll notice that appearance is there twice. Once it says with CSS and once it says with HTML. Well, what I want you to realize is if you do it with CSS, you're going to have more options. And the biggest one specifically is you can set the repeat of an image. So if you wanted an image to repeat only horizontally or vertically, you can do that here with the background. You can't do that if you click on the HTML. So if I click on HTML here, you'll see I can select a background image for my page, but I have no controls over it whatsoever as far as whether it repeats, whether it doesn't repeat, or anything like that. So you definitely want to be in the CSS tab here for this. And notice I can set colors or images. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just set a color. So I can go and I can set any, like a dark gray. I can select, different specific colors and test them out, whatever works. That's pretty hideous, actually. But you can go through and you can select colors. Now, one of the other interesting things that you can do is you can also select colors and an image, which we'll get to in a minute here, so that they will blend together a little bit. So the image may not take up the entire space, but because of the way you have it, if it's got a background of say, black, and it's a black picture mostly, they'll blend together rather nicely. So we can do that as well. So that's what's right there is you can choose colors or anything like that. Okay. Now, the other thing that you can do is choose an image that we call a tiled image. And this is the default that a lot of the websites go through. And let me just go and show you these. I downloaded a bunch of these off the internet, so it's not anything really that special. But I started with this one, and it's pretty small. It's probably about 100 pixels or so tops, and it looks like cloth. Okay. The special thing about this image is whoever did this pattern, okay, and this is an art form in and of itself in a lot of ways, did it so that when you take another one of these and you move it alongside the first one, top, bottom, or whatever, the sides match up so that you won't see that it's being copied over and over and over again. Well, you won't see the edge. But the problem with that is you'll start seeing these repeated patterns of color. So if I go back into my, Dreamweaver and I choose that, so I go Page Properties, take my background image, and I choose images, tiled backgrounds, and there's the cloth one, old, and apply it. It's an interesting little glitch I've got going on there. But what you can see is, can you see how this is this repeating highlight here? Yeah. Okay? So you can't see the actual division between the JPEGs. You can't actually see where one ends and the other one begins. But you can see the fact that it's been copied over and over and over again. This is powerful. These kinds of backgrounds are powerful because they're small. They don't take very long to load. And if you do it right, they're rather unassuming. Let me show you a couple others that we've got here that I could load in. I literally just went to a web page and I typed in tiled backgrounds and I got a whole bunch of them. So here's a marble. Ooh, that one's really hideous. Let's try this one. Choose and apply. That one's okay, but again, you see how you've got that repeated harsh line that's there. Let's try, let's see, that one's probably a little bit better. It's a little heavier, but you can't see the repeated background quite as much, okay? Why can't you see the repeated background as much as the other one? It's darker, but actually you're probably using the wrong term. Yes, it's darker, but what does it have less of?
Hue. Isn't it more opaque?
No, somebody said there's less light. So if it's mostly dark, you have less. It starts with a C. Contrast. Very good. It's the contrast that's going to give you away when you have a tiled background like this. Tiled backgrounds are usually best with something that's really low contrast. So here's what I did. I took that number 1 cloth, I took it, and I went into Photoshop with it. So here's the original here. Let's just choose that really quickly and apply it. So there's the original. And I took it into Photoshop, and I lowered the contrast. Now watch what happens. See these repeated patterns? This is literally the exact same JPEG. I just lowered the contrast. Now you can barely see it at all. And yet at the same time, there is still a little bit of texture there. There is actually something there for the background. I didn't want it to be pure white. I also didn't want it to be just a pure ivory. I wanted some type of a texture. But I also didn't want people to look at it and go, oh, that's a tiled background. You know what I mean? Like I wanted somewhere in the middle. So I took that image that I downloaded into Photoshop, and I brought it into Photoshop, and I lowered the contrast to the point where you could barely tell. And I'd tell you, I would do it, and I'd say, okay, I'm done. And then like 3 days later, I'd look at it and I'd say, I can still see the repeated pattern. So I'd bring it back into Photoshop, and I'd lower the contrast even more. I kept doing that until I finally said, now I got it. It probably took me like a week where I would leave it for a day and just look at it for a whole day and go, no, I need more or less, as the case may be. Does this make sense? So now we've already gone 2 different ways of doing a background. One is solid color, which is fine for a lot of websites. 2 is a tiled background, which is, again, fine for a lot of websites. The third is a big JPEG. You might find a nice big JPEG that you want to have in the background. Now, I would suggest a couple of things. Number 1, if you're going to do that, that JPEG should probably, and I'm going to show you an example here that it's not, but probably should be low contrast again. Why? Because if it's going to be underneath your text area and your content, you don't want it to compete with your content, right? Okay, that would make sense. But if it's not, it definitely needs to give your content space. It needs to work in a way that's going to make sense so that your images aren't, or that your background image doesn't compete with what you're trying to do with your web page. So here's an example from a student from the first assignment that we did. Now it doesn't show up very well, but if I go and I preview in Safari, okay, it looks pretty cool. And what's really nice is, through some good use of CSS, we're able to have a background. And what I like about this background, and the reason why I think it works, is because it's got a lot of contrast to it. So in some ways it breaks the rules, but it stays at the bottom. It matches the buttons, which is nice, and you've still got space for your content over top. This would be a perfect website for a nice white box for your content that floats over top of it. Nice and simple. It isolates your content from the background, and you're done. You know what I mean? I think that would be great. So let's go over how we did this, And it actually ended up being a little bit of a task, and I'm going to show you that in a second. But we're going to go through it, and we're going to try and remake this page. So I'm not going to put it on my page, by the way, because I think that would be really hideous. Those things don't match. So I'm just going to make a new file here, and we're just going to go and try. So I'm going to call this a whole background.html. So now I've got this, and this is empty. And what I can do is I can save page properties, and I can click on it, and I'm going to go find that JPEG that she used for her background. And it's this one. Click choose, and then I'm going to set the repeat to none because I don't want it to repeat at all, and I'm going to click apply. Now what's interesting is this is so big that it's not really showing me what's going on here, but there we go. Now we've got a problem already in the fact that if I just go and I say preview in Safari, you'll see that it doesn't move around with me. So depending upon the browser size, it's not going to move with as the person resizes the browser. Now the JPEG's nice and big, so it's actually bigger than the window, which is a benefit in this case. But if I were to change the resolution on this monitor to full screen size, it's not because I'm hooked up to the projector for you guys. But if I went to the full resolution that I can handle on this monitor, we would see that this picture doesn't actually fit, and then it would just stop. And so you would have this major problem of the fact that it doesn't fit. So then what we can try to do, and you can kind of see how it works here, we can try and say that we want the background to fit to the bottom. Now the problem with this is now we have to get into a little bit of coding, because one of the things that happened, actually, before we go there, what we can do is we can tell the browser that we want the JPEG to always be 100% of the browser window, so that as the window goes up and down in size, it will shrink the JPEG on the fly. Now the problem with this is, if I click on here, notice that's not anywhere in the CSS properties. This is one of the very frustrating things for me about Dreamweaver, is it doesn't have this in here. So in order to do this, I have to go into the code. So I'm going to click into the code, and let's zoom in here, and you can see right here in the body text, it says body, and it says background image. There's our neon glow image, background repeat. What you have to do is click in here, then hit return, and now I can start to type background, and then look, it'll give me a whole bunch of options. I'm going to do background size equals 100%. And you always have to put the semicolon at the end. So just follow the pattern that you see above it, and you'll be fine. So I'm going to save that. Doesn't matter. You don't need the space, nor do you have to have it. Now a preview in Safari again. Now notice it scales the JPEG up, but we've got all this space at the bottom. Now, here comes something interesting. There's another thing that you can do called background position. So if I go back to Dreamweaver, I can go in there and say background, and I can take position, double click, and I can say bottom, double click, and then semicolon. This is what's interesting if you do this. This is what gets frustrating. So if your background needs to fit to the top, cool. But if you want it on the bottom, all of a sudden you're going to have problems. See it up there? I don't know what it does. Well, I do know what it does. So this is interesting. So it pushed it up there. Now watch what happens. This is what's interesting. If I go into Dreamweaver, I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to start typing some gobbledygook here. Oh, look what it's doing. Well, it's freaking out is what it's doing. That's interesting. Well, now here's the interesting thing. Somebody said something about div containers. This is not in a div. There are no divs yet. This is CSS that it's attached to the body of the web page. As it happens, in order to solve this problem, we do have to go to divs. So first, let's just go to the design. I want to show you this. So we've got this. Boy, it's freaking out, isn't it? let's make my text white so that we can see it a little bit better. Okay, and let's preview this in Safari. Oh, well now that's kind of weird, isn't it? What it's doing. Okay, it's trying to put it at the bottom, but here's the basic idea. It's only ever going to put it at the bottom of however big the content is. So your content may be really short. It's going to start at the bottom of the content because the body, which we're attaching this background image to, is only as long as the stuff that's inside it. What we need to do, if we want this background image to behave the way we really want it to, is we need to tell it to make a div that basically goes to 100% top to bottom first. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a wrapper div. It's usually called a wrapper in web design. And then we'll have actually some more controls. So watch what we'll do. It's really simple, actually. So I'm going to go into Dreamweaver. I'm going to take my page properties and I'm going to get rid of my, my background. Get rid of those things and click OK. And then what's interesting is it doesn't delete the other stuff either. So we're just going to trash that all. Right there. You don't even need to do that. It'll work just fine without it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a div tag. And we're going to call this div tag the wrapper, or we'll call it background image, something like that. But I like wrapper is what's considered kind of kosher for this kind of thing. So we'll use wrapper. So then I'm going to make a new CSS rule, click OK, and in my box I'm going to set my width to 100% and 100% tall. So width and height is 100%. I don't worry about the float. I'm going to take my margin and set it to 0 so that it's going to be right up against it. And then here's something interesting that I found. I have to play with the positioning. I have to tell it to be fixed, and I have to tell it to put the top to 0 and the left to 0, which puts it in the top left-hand corner. Think of it like a grid. 0x and 0y. 0, 0, right there in the top left-hand corner. Now I can take my background image, make it my neon glow, and say no repeat, and set it to bottom. Now you see I've got the background positioning. But here's my other big problem. Do you see background size in here? Nope, neither do I. See it? I don't see it. It's not there. Why? What? I don't understand why it's not there, but it's not there. So I have to go back into the code here and set my background size to 100%. Now, I've got a problem here, and I'll show it to you in a second. So we'll save, preview in Safari. That looks pretty good. Now it's all the way at the bottom. Well, what's my next problem?
The top isn't covered.
The top isn't covered. How do you suppose I should solve that? This is an easy one. Black background. If I just set my background on the entire page to black, it'll blend in. Now, a word of caution here. With black, you're usually pretty safe. With other colors, however, though, how are you going to match the color in the code? So I'm just going to go here, watch this. I'm just going to go here and I'm going to say page properties, and I'm going to go to my background color. I'm going to make it black. The code for black is 000. Okay? I click apply, click OK. There we go. Now it blends pretty good. But let's say I wanted this pink. Let's say I wanted to make the background the pink. How would I get that pink? How do I know what the code is for that pink? The answer is I don't and I won't. And here's the big problem. You can even find the color and maybe match it. Maybe. And it will look okay on this computer. But it might not look okay on somebody else's computer. It might not look okay on a PC or a different browser. different browsers and different kinds of computers, they render the colors that are in the code very differently. So a lot of times, if it's something other than black and white, your best bet is to open that image in Photoshop, crop a little piece of the color that you want, and set that as a background image that's tiled. And and it's a solid color, so it'll just show up as a solid color, but now you know you've got the color that you want. Okay, so you just take a little slice. And if you need to do that, I can help you with it. But that's an easy way of making sure you get the color you want. Because when you do it with the code, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so now what's my other problem with this here? There's a big problem here that's happening. What's happening to my text? It's getting eaten up, as they said first period. It's getting covered by the other div. Why is that? Anybody tell me? The div's on top of it. Correct. If I look at what I did, I wasn't really thinking about this. When I created my div, this div is 100% wide and it's 100% tall. What that means is everything else that is on this page has to go inside the wrapper. Has to go inside the wrapper. All this gobbledygook text that I did before, it's not inside the wrapper. It's outside the wrapper. It's outside that div. So I just need to take this, I can highlight it, and if it's your buttons or whatever, you can do the same thing. Command C for copy, delete it, and then I'll just highlight the text there, and paste. Now it's inside the div. And if I go save, and preview Safari, look at that. Now, another interesting thing is happening here. Notice that because this is a fixed position and it's a fixed height, the text is running off the page and I can't see it. Oops. There's no scrolly bar though. It's gone. So here's